So ever since the time I was born until present day, Iceland has changed a lot, turning from what was essentially, I guess, what they call an ethno-state. I don't know what ethno-state means, but it sounds like the accurate description, into a multicultural society. Now, I myself don't care that much about immigration. It's not one of these things that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I mainly think about day-to-day politics, but this is a topic that a lot of people are curious about, and a lot of people want to know what it's like to live in Iceland, you know, from this perspective, so whatever, might as well do a video about that. This, however, is just going to be a general overview. I'm not going to go very deep into whatever it is that you're hoping to learn here, but yeah, just a brief general overview of immigration in Iceland. So according to the latest numbers, roughly 11% of the current population of Iceland, that is about 39,000 people, is foreign born. And this is a number that has been growing rapidly, especially in the past 10 years, but overall has been growing in the past 30 years or so. And yeah, I think I also read that that all immigrants, that is including second-generation immigrants, make up as much as 19% of the population. I have a problem, however, with the term second-generation immigrants because, well, technically I am one, or at least I think I am. One of my parents was foreign-born, so yeah. So the largest immigrant community in Iceland are the Poles. I recently read, I think it was 2 days ago, that the Polish population of Iceland has now reached 20,000, or about half of the Iceland's entire immigrant population. Poles started to immigrate to Iceland en masse in the early 90s, and, well, I guess it is fair to say that they currently at least hold a similar spot in Icelandic culture, so to speak, as the Irish immigrants did in the United States at the middle of the 18th century. I think that's a somewhat fair comparison in seeing that this is a class of people that, at least in the minds of most Icelanders, or most people here, you know, it's kind of a working class type of immigrants. You know, most of them, you know, have jobs, usually often unskilled laborers or service workers, especially service workers. If you're a tourist in Reykjavik, you will have noticed in a lot of hotels and restaurants, ton of Polish people work there nowadays. But I think, as a whole, Icelanders tend to have a fairly high view of Polish immigrants, especially nowadays. Now, in the beginning there was a lot of animosity towards them, but I think by now they are, for the most part, generally pretty well accepted, especially those that have lived here long enough to, you know, learn the language and the culture and stuff. And it's actually kind of funny because I know a few Polish migrants that have lived here most of their lives who don't really like the fresher, newer Poles. You know, these are, you know, ethnically Poles that are in practicality as Icelandic as you and me, and generally often have the very same views on the fresher immigrant, the newer immigrants, as any Icelander, as your average Joe Icelander has as well. So there's a, you might even say that there's a generational gap there between the, you know, more old, you know, between the older Polish immigrants that have been here for a very long time, and you know, who kind of look down upon these like newbies that come and you know, still haven't learned the language, and you know, haven't assimilated properly and stuff like that. I think the second largest group of immigrants after Poles are probably Lithuanians, but to most Icelanders, I think when they meet, you know, a Lithuanian guy, they usually just assume that he's Polish, because let's face it, and the same often goes if you meet any other sort of Eastern European person in Iceland, you're statistically likely to guess that guess correctly that they are Polish. So if you are any Eastern European migrant in Iceland, chances are you have been more than once asked whether or not you are from Poland. And I think those migrants who are not Polish but from Eastern Europe are probably used to hearing that, because it's just one of these like, no, I know it's the statistical likelihood, but no, actually I'm from Latvia or God knows where else from. Now, interestingly also, according to polls conducted on immigrants here in Iceland, Polish migrants in Iceland are extremely satisfied, in general at least, with living in Iceland, comparative to Polish or other Eastern European migrants in other Western European countries. Iceland seems to be the one country where they feel, I don't know, most at home. According to polls, they have suffered the least amount of discrimination in Iceland out of probably all other Western European nations, which is curious, I suppose. I've heard this joke that it's all because of the Prince Polo chocolate, which Icelanders absolutely love. So when the first Polish migrants came here, people were like, oh, you're from the country where Prince Polo comes from. Oh, nobody who makes Prince Polo for a living could possibly be evil. Or something like that, I don't know. Obviously also a lot of migrants in Iceland come from other Western European nations, a lot of them come from the Nordic countries or Germany, Netherlands, France, and etc. And I believe that the fourth largest group of immigrants in Iceland currently are, believe it or not, Americans. Yeah, Americans. I guess the wall only works one way, huh? Now, these people are not as noticeable. When I say not as noticeable, it's simply because they usually, assimilate much quicker and, are pretty early on viewed as being simply Icelandic, comparative to some of these Eastern Europeans. But I think that is simply due to the fact that they usually arrive as individuals, either, meet an Icelander abroad, decide to marry him or her and come to Iceland that way, whereas, most of these Poles and other groups that we'll discuss later, come here to work often as entire families and therefore often hang out much more with people from their original country rather than mixing more broadly with the general Icelandic public, and therefore, it takes a longer time for them to assimilate. Now, because there are so many Poles, almost 20,000 of them, it is actually nowadays quite easy for new Polish migrants to move to Iceland and not learn any single words of Icelandic, at least not early on, because very often they have other Polish friends, talk Polish with them, and often work in companies or businesses where mostly other immigrants work, so they only speak English or even just Polish, if that's how the makeup of said workplace is. So yeah, the latest generations, or whatever you want to call it, of Polish migrants seem to be less inclined to, I don't know, assimilate, but at least not learn the language, because there is, simply less need for them to do so. They can get by so easily simply speaking Polish and whatever little of English they know. Yeah, a lot of the older generation of Polish migrants here are really annoyed by that often. Like, they often look down at these newly arrived, Poles that sometimes have been here for years at a time and don't speak any Icelandic, and just kind of sort of look down at these uneducated, undisciplined newly arrivals who don't assimilate properly like they did. So yeah, I think that's pretty curious. Other Eastern Europeans that you'll encounter in Iceland come from all over, a lot of Romanians, a lot of people from the Eastern Yugoslav republics. Actually, during the 90s, Iceland did take on quite a few refugees from this war zone that used to be down there, a lot of Bosnians, Albanians. Okay, I'm just gonna say, I have no idea where, from which of the former Yugoslav countries we have the most migrants from. I'm guessing most of them are Serbian, but I think there is a pretty broad mixture. Then of course there's the Asian community, where people from Thailand and the Philippines are the largest ethnic groups. I think there are just over 1,000 Thailand-born migrants in Iceland as of 2019. And I think it's similar as to with the Polish immigrants, because immigrants from Far Eastern Asia started to arrive pretty early in Iceland. So, like, there's the older generation that has lived here for a long time, speaks Icelandic fluently, has adapted very well, has even managed to adjust to the cold and the harsh climate, which is impressive. So, and yes, then there are those newly arrived generations that have not assimilated as well, but because they are so few in numbers, it's harder for them to get away with not learning Icelandic, so to speak. So, in my view, Asians that come here generally adjust quite well and assimilate and, you know, learn the language. Learning the language is sort of my key focus here, because I think that is the number one issue with migrants as a whole, is that when they don't learn the language, it's harder for them to take part in society, and then they become closed off from the larger society where they live in, and so they have a danger of creating a society within a society, which is usually never a recipe for stability. Alright, so if you clicked on this video, there is an excellently high chance that you clicked on it because you wanted me to talk about one particular group of immigrants. Yes, there is a certain group of migrants that are definitely undermining the very foundations of our society. And let's talk about them. Yes, let's talk about the Jews. No, Muslims, yes. Let's talk about the Muslims. But in case you're wondering, are there even any Jews in Iceland? Well, apparently yes, there are some. I don't have anything to say about them. I don't think I've even met a single one of them that I'm aware of. I think the Jewish population of Iceland is probably under 200, so let's just assume there's about one entire reef full of Jews somewhere in Iceland. I don't know. But yeah, the Muslims. So there aren't that many Muslims in Iceland. Now, their number has grown, especially in the past 10 years, but there aren't, I believe, not even 1,000 of them yet. So yeah, let's assume that there's about maybe an entire Bolungarvík's worth of Muslims in Iceland as of 2019. Where do these Muslims come from? I'm not sure. I venture to say that most of them are probably Moroccans, but there's also quite a few Palestinians, I'm sure, and the refugees that have come in recently, obviously most of them were from Syria and Afghanistan. I mean, no, that's where most refugees are running from these days. As far as I know, most Muslims in Iceland are relatively secular, because let's face it, nobody wants to let any sort of extremists into their country. That's just the way that is. Nobody wants extremists. So one can assume that if immigration matters are handled correctly, that it's going to be hard for extremists to take foothold here, but who knows. Now, it probably doesn't come as any surprise that, you know, being that Icelanders generally have a very high view of Polish migrants and a somewhat lower view of most other Eastern European migrants, and I guess a similar view of like Eastern Asian migrants. Muslim migrants fall a bit lower on the scale in terms of how well liked they are. There has been a lot of animosity towards them, but honestly I just don't know, because there's just so much propaganda going both ways nowadays that you have no idea where Icelanders in general stand on this matter. You know, obviously there's been a lot of issues with a lot of racist critique of the Muslim invasion of the Western world and stuff like that, and then on the other hand you have these super far woke liberals, you know, that want to erase all borders and stuff like that, and somewhere in between most people just want to get on with their daily lives and just want to whatever immigrants that come to assimilate, Muslims or otherwise. Honestly, this may be justified in a lot of other countries, but in Iceland the Muslim proportion of the immigrant community is still so low that there really is very little to talk about there. Most immigrant-related issues, in my experience, have been related to Eastern Europeans, simply because there's much more of them. Makes sense. Now, based on whatever little research I did before making this video, is that being a Muslim in Iceland isn't that unsimilar to being a Muslim in most other Western European countries nowadays, in terms of, you know, just what the rhetoric is in these countries. Although I think that because in Iceland most immigrants aren't Muslims, but from other countries, you know, the makeup of immigrants in Iceland is very different from a country like Sweden, where I believe the biggest immigrant group is Syrians. So you simply don't notice these Muslims a whole lot, if at all. In fact, it's very common for people to see a Portuguese person. Well, Portuguese migrants live in Iceland also. They're often mistaken for Muslims simply due to their color of their skin. And then, of course, there are African migrants. Oh, obviously, mostly are black, and you know, and as far as I know, there's a 50-50 chance you see one of them that they could be either Christian or Muslim or something else entirely. So yeah, generally there's just not a lot of understanding and knowledge about Muslims in Iceland in general, so people just always assume, you know, people that are very worried about these Muslims taking over, they always assume that a colored migrant is a Muslim, and so information on that is difficult to come by, at least reliable information. But yeah, as a whole, I think like most Icelanders would prefer, you know, white, easily assimilatable migrants over, for example, refugees from, say, Muslim countries. But then again, most countries, most people in Iceland would also recognize the danger that these people are sometimes running from. I say sometimes because, of course, sometimes these people that have showed up here or somewhere else have just been trying to exploit the system to simply make use of the existing welfare system. I am Johan Phoenix, and you are watching Iceland in Real Life, my new channel name. Anyway, have a nice day.